You know the feeling. Someone enters your life and within days, sometimes hours, they are everywhere in your mind. You wake up thinking about them. You go through the motions of your day while a separate process runs continuously in the background, replaying every conversation, analyzing every word they said, constructing elaborate scenarios about what might happen next. You check your phone with a frequency that embarrasses you. You interpret a delayed response as a sign. A quick response as a sign. Silence as a sign. A single emoji as evidence of something. You know this is not rational. You know that the time you are spending inside this person's orbit is disproportionate to what you actually know about them. And yet you cannot stop. And if you have ever been in this state and tried to explain it to someone who was not in it, you will know how impossible that explanation becomes. Because the person you are trying to explain it to thinks you are describing love. And what you are describing is not love. It is something neurologically distinct from love. Something Dorothy Tennov spent years researching and documenting and gave a name to in 1979. She called it limerence. And the mechanism she described is so precise, so specific, so recognizable to anyone who has experienced it, that people who encounter the word for the first time often report something close to grief. Not because it diminishes what they felt, but because having a name for it means they are not alone in it. And what the name reveals about the nature of that feeling is both liberating and genuinely unsettling. Stay with me. Because what we are about to get into changes how you understand not just obsession, but what you have been calling love. Dorothy Tennov was a psychologist at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut. In the late 1960s and 1970s, she began interviewing people about their experiences of romantic attraction. She expected to find a consistent picture. What she found instead was that her subjects were describing two completely different phenomena using the same word. Some people described love as a deep, stable, companionate attachment. Something that grew over time and coexisted with ordinary life without disrupting it. And some people described something entirely different. An involuntary, intrusive, consuming state of longing they had not chosen and could not turn off. That generated intrusive thoughts about a specific person at a frequency that interfered with work, sleep, and daily functioning. That was sustained by uncertainty and devastated by definitive rejection. That had a physical dimension. A literal ache in the chest. And that the person experiencing it would almost universally describe, in retrospect, as something closer to illness than to joy. Tennov interviewed over 500 people and collected thousands of written testimonies. She concluded that what these people were describing was not a variation of love. It was a distinct psychological state with its own characteristics, its own trajectory, and its own internal logic. She published her findings in 1979 in a book called Love and Limerence. The word limerence was one she invented specifically because no existing term was precise enough. Reading it feels less like psychology and more like someone describing your own internal life back to you. The clinical picture of limerence has specific characteristics that Tennov documented consistently across all her subjects. The first and most defining is intrusive thinking. The limerent person thinks about the limerent object, the term Tennov used for the person the limerence is directed toward, with a frequency and intensity that is genuinely involuntary. These are not chosen thoughts. They are intrusions. They arrive during unrelated tasks. They interrupt concentration. They occupy the gap between one thought and the next with an efficiency that the limerent finds both compulsive and exhausting. Tennov estimated that at peak limerence, the average subject was spending between 85 and 100% of their available cognitive bandwidth thinking about the limerent object. Not occasionally. Continuously. The second characteristic is acute sensitivity to the limerent object's behavior. Every action taken by the limerent object is interpreted for signal. A glance held fractionally longer than usual becomes evidence of feeling. A late-night message becomes meaningful. A neutral comment is parsed for subtext. And this interpretation is systematically biased toward hope. The limerent brain is not looking for an accurate picture. It is looking specifically for evidence of reciprocation, and it finds it in everything. The third characteristic is what Tennov identified as the defining structural feature of the entire state. Uncertainty sustains limerence. Certainty ends it. Definitive rejection extinguishes the state. But uncertainty sustains it indefinitely. And that single fact explains everything. If you watched our previous video on intermittent reinforcement, what you are about to hear is going to feel very familiar. Because limerence and intermittent reinforcement are not just related phenomena. They are the same engine running in two different contexts. Tennov identified that the most intense and most sustained limerent states were produced not by unambiguous rejection and not by unambiguous reciprocation, but by the uncertain middle. The maybe. The sometimes warm and sometimes distant. The relationship that is never quite defined in either direction. And what the limerent brain does with that uncertainty is the same thing that Skinner's rat did with a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. It treats every ambiguous signal as a possible reward. It amplifies the significance of every glimmer, which is the term Tennov herself used, a glimmer being any behavior from the limerent object that can be interpreted as evidence of reciprocal feeling. A glimmer does not have to be large. It does not have to be unambiguous. It just has to be interpretable. And the limerent brain is extraordinarily efficient at finding interpretability in almost nothing. A like on a post. A particular tone of voice. The fact that they remembered something you said 3 weeks ago. Each of these is a glimmer. Each glimmer feeds the cycle. And here is the part that makes this genuinely difficult to escape. The limerent object does not have to be doing anything deliberate to maintain the limerence. They just have to be present enough to keep the uncertainty alive. The neuroscience of limerence was not well understood in Tennov's era. She was working from behavioral data and written testimony. But the neuroimaging research that followed in the 2000s gave her clinical picture a biological address. And what it found was more interesting than anyone had anticipated. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist at Rutgers University, used functional MRI to study the brains of people who described themselves as intensely romantically attracted to someone. And what she found was that the brain regions activated in early intense romantic attraction were not the regions associated with calm, secure attachment. They were the regions associated with reward-seeking and craving. Specifically the caudate nucleus and the ventral tegmental area, region central to the dopamine reward system that are also activated by cocaine and other addictive substances. The brain of someone in a full limerent state looks neurologically like a brain in the grip of a craving, not a brain experiencing love. But there is a second neurochemical dimension that specifically distinguishes limerence from ordinary infatuation. Research by Donatella Maraziti and colleagues in Italy found that the serotonin levels of people in states of intense romantic obsession were significantly lower than those of controls. Specifically, they were comparable to the serotonin levels of people diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. The intrusive thoughts of limerence are not just emotionally similar to OCD. They are neurochemically similar to OCD. Wait. Let that land. Because that single finding reframes everything. Here is the part of limerence that the person in it almost never sees from the inside. And it is the most important thing Tennov documented. The person the limerent is obsessing about is not the real person. It is a construction. Tennov borrowed a term from the 19th century French writer Stendhal to describe this process. She called it crystallization. Stendhal had observed that a branch left in a salt mine emerges covered in crystals, transformed by the environment into something that seems to sparkle and be precious far beyond its original nature. The limerent object undergoes the same transformation in the limerence mind. Their qualities are amplified. Their flaws are minimized or reinterpreted as endearing. Their ambiguous behaviors are resolved in the most favorable direction. The construction that forms in the limerence mind is not the person. It is a version of the person assembled from selective attention and motivated interpretation, scaffolded by hope and sustained by the dopamine and serotonin chemistry of the limerent state itself. And this has a consequence that is genuinely important to understand. The pain of unreciprocated limerence is not the pain of losing the person. It is the pain of losing the construction. The real person was never fully known. What is mourned is the version that lived in the limerence mind. Which is why the grief is so often disproportionate to the actual relationship. Because what was lost was not what was there. It was what was built inside the architecture of the obsession. The distinction between limerence and love is the one Tennov was most careful to draw. And it is the one people most resist. Because if you have experienced both states, they feel profoundly different from the inside. Limerence is characterized by anxiety, by the constant low-level tension of uncertainty, by a hypervigilance toward the limerent object that has nothing to do with care and everything to do with the management of one's own internal state. The limerent person is not primarily thinking about the well-being of the limerent object. They are thinking about whether the limerent object is thinking about them. Love, as Tennov distinguished it, is primarily other-directed. It is oriented toward the actual person. It can survive certainty. It does not require the fuel of uncertainty to sustain itself. And this distinction is, once you have heard it, almost brutally clarifying. Because it allows you to ask about any specific state you are in or have been in a very direct question. Am I thinking about this person, or am I thinking about how this person makes me feel? Am I concerned with their reality, or am I concerned with the signal they represent to my nervous system? The answer to that question determines which state you are actually in. And the answer is often not what the person asking it wants to hear. Because the honest answer means that what felt like the most profound connection of your life may have been, in significant part, a relationship with a version of someone that only you could see. Limerence is far more common than the clinical language around it suggests. Tennov's research indicated that the majority of people experience at least one significant limerent episode during their lifetime. And the people most susceptible to entering limerent states are not, as is sometimes assumed, the most romantically inexperienced or the most emotionally immature. The research connecting anxious attachment styles to limerent susceptibility suggests that the predisposition toward limerence is laid down early. In childhood attachment experiences that were themselves inconsistent. Where a caregiver's warmth was intermittent and the child's nervous system was trained to treat attention as a scarce and precious resource. The person who grew up uncertain about whether the people who were supposed to love them reliably did, is the person whose nervous system is already calibrated for limerence. Already practiced at scanning for glimmers. Already oriented toward the variable schedule. When that person meets someone who produces the right combination of warmth and uncertainty, the limerent state does not arrive gradually. It arrives all at once. As if the nervous system recognizes the pattern before the mind does. As if some part of the brain says, yes, I know this feeling, I have been trained for exactly this. And the training begins before language does. Before memory does. Before any of the choices that adults make about who to love and how. This is the architecture that childhood builds. And it is the architecture that limerence runs on. The duration of limerence is one of the most important and most underreported aspects of what Tennov documented. The popular cultural understanding of infatuation treats it as temporary. Something that fades as the relationship develops or fails to develop. And for many people, ordinary infatuation does fade. But limerence does not follow the same timeline. Tennov found that the average duration of a limerent episode under conditions of sustained uncertainty was between 18 months and 3 years. And under conditions of intermittent reinforcement, where the limerent object occasionally provides glimmers but never provides definitive reciprocation or definitive rejection, limerence can persist for decades. There are documented cases of people maintaining active limerent states for 10, 15, 20 years. Still experiencing the intrusive thoughts. Still interpreting signals. Still spending significant cognitive resources on a relationship that has never formally existed. And this duration is not a symptom of weakness or pathology in any simple sense. It is the predictable output of a specific neurological system responding to a specific type of intermittent signal in exactly the way it was designed to respond. The limerent is not failing to get over someone. They are succeeding at the task their nervous system was given. The problem is who gave them the task, and when, and what they were trying to solve for at the time. The question of how limerence ends is the one that most people caught in it most want answered. Tennov's research and the clinical work that followed points toward three conditions. Definitive unambiguous rejection with no possibility of reinterpretation. Complete withdrawal of access to the limerent object, including indirect access through social media, mutual contacts, and any channel through which glimmers might arrive. Or the transfer of limerence to a new limerent object, which is not resolution so much as relocation. The first condition is the most efficient and the least likely to occur, because most human interactions are ambiguous enough that the limerent brain can always find a reinterpretation. The second condition is the most reliable but requires the same no-contact logic that the intermittent reinforcement research describes. The extinction curve cannot complete while the variable schedule is still delivering doses in any form. Even occasional indirect information about the limerent object constitutes a glimmer. And a glimmer, however small, is sufficient to reset the cycle. The most uncomfortable finding in all of this is simple. In the absence of those conditions, limerence does not fade with time alone. Time without contact fades it. Time with intermittent glimmers extends it indefinitely. It is not a wound that heals on its own. It is a system that runs for as long as it is fed. And the cruelest version of this is the one where the limerent object never knows they are the fuel. What does recovery from limerence actually look like? It is important here to separate the question into its two distinct versions. Recovering from an unrequited limerent episode, and recovering from a limerent attachment within an actual relationship, which is the more complex and more common clinical presentation. In an actual relationship, limerence often transforms over time into one of two things. Either genuine love, the stable other-directed anxiety-tolerant state that Tennov described as structurally distinct, or a chronic limerent dependency where the relationship is maintained primarily by the limerent person's need for the other person's validation rather than by genuine mutual connection. This second pattern is extraordinarily common and extraordinarily under-recognized. It produces relationships that are highly asymmetrical in effort, highly asymmetrical in emotional investment, and deeply destabilizing to the limerent person's sense of self because their internal state is entirely dependent on signal coming from outside. Recovery from limerence in any of its forms is ultimately about the same thing. It is about redirecting the system that produces the obsessive attachment towards something that does not require a specific person's signal to sustain itself. It is about rebuilding the internal baseline that limerence erodes. The sense of being enough before the glimmer arrives. And that is not a psychological insight that arrives once and fixes everything. It is a practice. It is the patient, unglamorous work of learning to generate the signal internally rather than waiting for it from outside. The thing that Dorothy Tennov gave to the people who read her work was not a cure. It was a name. And names matter more than they are given credit for. Because the person sitting in the grip of an intrusive, consuming, anxiety-laden obsession and calling it love is in a different situation from the person sitting in the exact same state and calling it limerence. Not because the label changes the neurochemistry, but because the label changes the question. If it is love, the question is whether the love is reciprocated. If it is limerence, the question is why the system is running, and what it was trained on, and whether the object of the obsession is actually a person you know or a construction your nervous system assembled from selective attention and motivated hope. That is a much more answerable question. And the answer, while it does not immediately resolve the state, begins the process of separating the self from the signal. Of recognizing that the intensity of what you feel is a piece of information about your own nervous system, not a verdict on the worthiness of the person who triggered it. Limerence is not a pathology. It is an extreme expression of a capacity that most humans have. The capacity to attach. The problem is not the attachment. It is the object. And the object was never the point. This has been the Echo Principle. We map the unseen blueprints of human behavior. The most consuming states are the ones that feel most like certainty from the inside and look most like construction from the outside. We will see you in the next one.